Hello good people, Eber here with Hardware Canucks, and today is going to be an interesting day because I will be swapping out the motherboard on my existing X299 workstation PC to something a little bit more robust. So if you do recall, about a few months ago I think we did a build sponsored by Intel featuring pretty much every high-end component out there, including an 18-core processor with two GTX 1080 Ti's and just maxed out stuff. But after then, I've been using this PC for editing because, you know, it's 18 cores. Who want to say no to that, right? And one of the things that I've run into is, of course, with the motherboard. So I've been using, or we decided to go with an MSI X299 M Gaming Carbon Pro AC motherboard. And one of the bottlenecks, or I guess one of the issues that we had with that motherboard was the VRMs weren't capable enough to overclock the 18-core processor, because I tried as much as to see if I can push it above 3.5 gigahertz or even hit the 3.5 gigahertz overclocking setting, but unfortunately I wasn't, because the VRMs just got way too hot, and so it just wasn't able to overclock the 18-core processor. Fast forward to Computex, we were at the EVGA booth checking out some cool stuff, and something really caught our attention, and it was this guy right over here, the X299 Micro ATX version 2. And what's really interesting about this motherboard is, obviously, first and foremost, it is a Micro ATX form factor, but most importantly, it features active cooling for the VRMs. So that means I would be able to overclock my 18-core processor. So the objective for this video is to keep the components identical. So that includes the cooling solution, the case, the graphics card, the memory, and the storage stuff exactly where they are, except for the motherboard. And we will be swapping out that component with this guy. So let the teardown process begin. But first, a quick message from our sponsor.
The new T46 Caliber DDR4 memory is one unique RGB kit with awesome light spill from each module, and the special edition has a cool totem design on the light bar. You get lifetime warranty, up to 4000 MHz speeds, and full lighting control through the software. Check out the T46 Caliber RAM down below.
Alright good people, so the swapping process is complete, but now it's time to see if the system actually boots, because you never know, I might have screwed something up while installing the CPU or the RAM or anything like that, but fingers crossed this actually works. Here we go. It works! It actually works! Well, the fans are actually blasting a bit, but I guess that has to do with, I might have to go into the BIOS and change the fan profile, but this is news to me, because I always screw up something, so this is awesome. Well, after spending the majority of the day playing around with the EVGA BIOS, I was finally able to overclock the Core i9-7980 Extreme Edition processor to 4.3 GHz at 1.15 volts. Now I'll leave the rest of the overclocking settings somewhere in the video down here so you can actually see those for yourselves. But this is fabulous to me. This is great news in my opinion, because being able to achieve that kind of clock speed on all 18 cores consistently is just awesome. I mean, being a nerd here, it really does show something in terms of where we are in terms of technology and how far we've come. Now, I did make sure to run a few stress tests to ensure stability. So the first thing I did was, of course, run the Adobe Media Encoder test to see if those clock speeds were consistent, and that was in fact true. I didn't notice any downclocks or anything like that while I was rendering a video, which is great. And the only thing that I would mention is that I had my AVX offset set to 3. So if you're hammering the CPU, or in my case, if I were to stress test the CPU at 100% on all 18 cores, then I can expect clock speeds to go to 4 gigahertz. That's something that I'm okay with. Moving on to temperatures, and I definitely expected a drastic increase in that department, because when you overclock a CPU, the obvious drawback, or I guess one of the compromises that you'll need to take, is the increase in terms of temperatures. In my case, I was rendering a 4K video using Adobe Media Encoder, and my low temps were around 50°C at stock settings compared to 78 degrees Celsius when the CPU was overclocked to 4.3 gigahertz. It's not too bad, especially if you think about this form factor, because I'm using the X62 AIO cooler from NZXT in a push-pull configuration. So, getting that kind of temps in a Micro ATX chassis is pretty awesome. I also want to touch base on power draw, and this is an important factor for me personally because I live in Toronto, Canada, and I pay one of the highest hydro rates. So, you know, being able to find a system that can be as efficient but also not consume a lot of power is also something on my wish list when it comes to building the optimized workstation PC, and this is certainly not for that. As you can see under stock settings, the system draws around 400 watts, and with the 4.3 GHz overclock, the system drew around 520 watts, which is ridiculous. So does that mean that I'll be sticking with this X299 PC in the long term? No, because I do intend to explore the Coffee Lake ecosystem, which is a lot more power efficient in my opinion, but it's also for the fact that, you know, with the recent update with Adobe Premiere Pro, it actually takes advantage of the integrated graphics chip on the processor as well as the discrete graphics card to accelerate rendering performance. So I'm really curious to test out and compare the 8700K to the 18-core processor and see which one's faster and more efficient, especially when it comes to cooling and of course power draw, because I really don't want to pay those expensive hydro rates. Now, with that being said, allow me to showcase some benchmarks that I ran on this system with both the stock settings and overclock settings. So I'm going to kick things off with Cinebench. At stock, we got a score of roughly 3357 when compared to 4213 on the overclocked 18-core processor at 4.3 gigahertz. Again, a massive improvement in terms of performance right over there. The same story goes when it comes to Blender as well. So I did run the BMW render scene, and the system at stock settings took 2 minutes and 22 seconds compared to 1 minute and 57 seconds on the overclock setting at 4.3 gigahertz. I do want to mention that this PC isn't really geared towards gaming or just X299 in general. You're much better off investing that money into the Z370 series or even the Ryzen platform, because you're going to be saving a lot or getting a lot in terms of value. So I don't really plan on running any gaming benchmarks just because it just wouldn't make any sense. But here, just for test purposes, I ran 3D Mark Firestrike Extreme test, and I got roughly 13,000 on the overclock setting compared to 12,500 with the stock setting. So it's not a drastic improvement right there, which is to be expected. And the last test here is rendering performance. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to switch from the MSI motherboard to the EVGA board and see if the overclock would actually make a difference in terms of rendering. So I took a 16-minute 4K project. In this case, it was the Cooler Master H500M case review video. You can check it out right over here if you're interested. But I took the 16-minute video and I rendered it to the YouTube 4K, or using the YouTube 4K preset with Adobe Media Encoder. And at stock settings, the system took 14 minutes and 40 seconds to complete that task when compared to 11 minutes and 27 seconds with the overclock setting at 4.3 gigahertz. It is a significant improvement in my opinion, because when we tried overclocking on the MSI board, we really didn't see a drastic difference in terms of rendering. So this is definitely a win-win. And I want to wrap things up by discussing some of the drawbacks with this EVGA X299 motherboard. The first one is the lack of multiple NVMe M.2 slots. So this particular motherboard only comes with one of them. So I had to sacrifice my scratch drive that I was using. So that was kind of a disappointment. The second being, it doesn't come with a USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C port, so I wasn't able to hook up my WD hard drive or my WD external storage array to this motherboard. Now, it did come with a Type-C to Type-A cable, which obviously solves the issue, but if you're someone who if you have external devices that use a USB Type-C interface, then you might find this a bit frustrating. And I cannot forget to talk about the active cooling solution for the VRMs. Take a listen to this. So as you heard, that's something that I have to deal with, especially during rendering times. I can see or I can hear those fans ramp up because, you know, it's basically utilizing all 18 cores at 4.3 gigahertz. So definitely keep that in mind. Don't expect the best acoustic performance if you're trying to build an ultimate compact X299 system with this particular motherboard. It's just not going to happen. So I hope you took away something from this video. In fact, it was an interesting experience for me swapping the MSI motherboard with the EVGA board. Definitely did not expect the system to boot right away because I always screw something up in between and I have to obviously go back and troubleshoot. But I'm glad everything worked out just fine. In fact, I'm very happy with the overclock because 4.3 gigahertz on all 18 cores is unimaginable. It's the first time I'm looking at something like this because it really is awesome. But I can't wait to test out the 8700K and of course test the Coffee Lake platform to see how it does in terms of rendering performance and compared to this guy right over here. So definitely stay tuned for that. In fact, if you're interested in this comparison, let me know in the comments down below. I'm Eber with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.